on the steps and help her count change, that he was always serious, always watching. And Jonathan felt memories surge back with brutal clarity, the smell of old wood and apples, the warmth of a place that felt safe when nothing else did. And then Samuel's voice grew heavier as he explained that after the factory closed and the town dried up, they lost everything slowly. The store first, then their home, then their health, that their children had moved away and drifted into lives that no longer had room for aging parents. And when Samuel fell ill, medical bills swallowed what little remained, and they had been living day to day, place to place, until they decided to walk, just walk, because movement felt better than waiting. And Eleanor said they had heard rumors of a man who made it out, who built an empire, and though they never expected anything, they wanted to see with their own eyes that goodness could survive success. And Jonathan listened as anger rose, not at them, but at the world he had conquered by becoming exactly what it demanded: hard, distant, unbreakable. And yet here were the two people who had shown him mercy when he was nothing, now reduced to asking nothing at all. And the twist that followed came quietly, because instead of offering money, instead of writing a check that could erase their problems instantly, Jonathan felt something else stir, something reckless and terrifying. And he told them they would stay, not as guests, but as family. And when Samuel protested, Jonathan snapped that this was not charity, that this was a debt long overdue. And days turned into weeks as the couple recovered, and the mansion changed in subtle ways, laughter echoing where silence once ruled, Eleanor humming while arranging flowers, Samuel walking the gardens with Jonathan, telling stories of Cedar Ridge, stories Jonathan had buried under quarterly reports and acquisitions. And then came the second twist, the one that nearly destroyed everything, when Jonathan's legal team uncovered that Samuel was listed as a claimant in an old land dispute tied to one of Jonathan's earliest developments, land that once belonged to the town, land acquired cheaply through legal loopholes after the collapse. And suddenly the board was alarmed, warning Jonathan that this couple could sue, that sentimentality was dangerous, that enemies often wore grateful faces. And Jonathan confronted Samuel in a storm of suspicion, accusing him of manipulation, of planning this encounter, of using the past as leverage. And Samuel listened without anger, only sadness, and said he knew about the land but had never planned to act, that at his age revenge felt pointless. And Eleanor, heartbroken, said they would leave immediately, that they never meant to cause harm. And as they packed their few belongings, Jonathan watched the mansion grow cold again, realizing too late that his fear of being used had nearly turned him into the very thing he despised. And in that moment, the final truth emerged, because Jonathan's investigators discovered that Samuel had quietly refused a class action lawsuit years earlier that could have made him wealthy, refusing because it would have bankrupted a young developer named Jonathan Hale, who was already drowning in debt at the time, a developer Samuel recognized as the boy from the grocery store. And when Jonathan learned this, the weight of it dropped him to his knees, understanding that his entire empire stood on an unseen act of mercy he never knew about, that his success was intertwined with kindness he did not earn. And he ran through the rain again, just like that first night, stopping the couple at the gates, apologizing in a voice stripped of power, begging them to stay not because of debt or guilt, but because his life finally made sense with them in it. And the ending was not a simple happily ever after, because Jonathan did something radical, something that shocked investors and headlines alike. He transformed Cedar Ridge into a revitalized community hub, funding education, healthcare, and small businesses, placing Samuel and Eleanor at the heart of it, not as symbols, but as leaders. And when asked why he risked so much, Jonathan said quietly that wealth was never the point, that the real measure of success was who you stop for in the rain. And years later, when Jonathan stood at Samuel's funeral holding Eleanor's hand, he realized the greatest twist of all was that the night he thought he was saving two strangers was actually the night his own humanity was rescued. And if this story moved you even a little, if it reminded you that the smallest kindness can echo for decades, then subscribe, because this is just one of many stories where hearts change faster than fortunes, and the next one might change the way you see your own life too. Before the story even begins, pause for half a second. If you believe that one moment can shatter a lifetime of certainty, if you believe kindness can return in ways money never can, and if you don't want to miss stories that stay with you long after the screen goes dark, hit subscribe right now, because this is one of those stories, the kind that starts in rain and ends in truth. And it begins the night a self-made millionaire named Jonathan Hale stopped his car in disbelief when he saw an elderly couple collapsed in the storm outside the iron gates of his mansion, their thin bodies pressed against the cold marble wall like they had nowhere else left on earth to go. And what shocked him wasn't just the sight of them soaked and shaking under the streetlight, but the strange, immediate feeling that this moment had been waiting for him his entire life. Because Jonathan Hale was a man who owned skyscrapers, tech patents, private jets, and silence. The kind of silence that follows you. When you've cut every emotional tie in the name of success, and as the rain hammered his windshield and the driver hesitated, Jonathan opened the door himself, stepping into the downpour in a tailored coat worth more than the couple's entire existence. And he asked sharply if they were alive, his voice carrying the authority of boardrooms and contracts, only to hear a weak groan from the elderly man whose hand was locked around the woman's wrist as if letting go would end them both. And something about that grip unsettled Jonathan more than any hostile takeover ever had, because it reminded him of a time he tried very hard to forget, a time before money when holding on was the only power people had. And despite his instincts screaming that this was a liability, a distraction, a risk, he ordered the guards to open the gates and carry them inside, ignoring the protests about security and protocol. And as they were brought into the guest wing, the house seemed to react, lights flicking on one by one, as if the mansion itself was waking up to witness something rare. And the staff wrapped the couple in blankets, while a private doctor was called. And Jonathan stood there watching, strangely unable to leave, noticing the woman's face as pale and lined as old paper, her lips moving silently, even in sleep, and the man's eyes fluttering open just long enough to scan the room in fear before settling on Jonathan with a look that was not gratitude, but recognition, deep and unsettling recognition. And when the doctor said they were suffering from hypothermia and exhaustion but would survive, Jonathan felt relief collide with annoyance, because relief was a feeling he had trained himself not to indulge in. And yet he found himself sitting in the study later that night, staring at the rain through the glass walls, unable to shake the image of that look. And when morning came, the couple was awake, sitting side by side on the edge of the bed, hands still clasped, and Jonathan introduced himself curtly, asking where they had come from and why they were outside his estate of all places, and the woman smiled faintly, saying they had been walking for hours with no destination, that the rain had simply overtaken them, and the man added quietly that they didn't expect help, they never did anymore. And something in his tone carried the weight of long disappointment, and Jonathan, irritated by his own curiosity, offered them breakfast and a ride wherever they wished to go, thinking this was a transaction he could complete and forget. But then the man asked, almost casually, if Jonathan remembered a place called Cedar Ridge, and the room seemed to tilt, because Cedar Ridge was the town Jonathan had erased from his history, the dying factory town he fled at 17 after his father vanished and his mother worked herself into an early grave. The place where hunger taught him ambition and love taught him pain. And Jonathan demanded to know how the man knew that name. And the elderly man sighed, finally releasing the woman's hand and standing with effort, saying softly that they had been hoping it was him, that the gates confirmed it, that the address matched, and that fate, it seemed, still had a sense of humor. And the woman began to cry silently as Jonathan's heart pounded with a fury he couldn't place. And the man introduced himself as Samuel and his wife as Eleanor. And then he said words that cracked something open in Jonathan that had been sealed for decades, he said. Your mother would be proud of you, even now. And Jonathan felt the room close in, demanding to know who they were. And Samuel looked at him with that same steady gaze and said he was the man who once owned the small grocery store on Maple Street, the one who let Jonathan's mother buy food on credit when others refused, the man who slipped extra bread into the bag and told a proud, scared boy that one day he'd pay it forward. And Eleanor added that Jonathan used to sit